You are walking through a dark forest in the year 1589. The moon is full, the trees are bare, and somewhere behind you a farmer named Peter Stump is confessing to a crowd of horrified onlookers that he has killed and eaten 18 people. He says he did it while transformed into a wolf. He says a demon gave him a magical belt, and when he strapped it around his waist, his hands became paws, his teeth became fangs, and his hunger became something no human should ever feel. They believed him. Not just the crowd, the judges, the executioners. The entire region of Bedburg, Germany, accepted it as fact. On October 31, 1589, Peter Stump was stretched on a wheel, had his flesh torn with red-hot pincers, had his arms and legs broken with the blunt side of an axe, and was finally beheaded. His body was burned. His daughter and his mistress burned alongside him. All of this happened in recorded history, with witnesses, with documents, with a trial that still survives. So here is the question that should keep you up tonight. Were there really werewolves? Or did something else happen in those forests? Something real, something terrifying, something that people in the 16th century had absolutely no framework to understand. The werewolf did not begin with Peter Stump. It is far older than that. Thousands of years older. And to understand why this legend refuses to die, you have to go back to a story that a Roman poet named Ovid wrote 2,000 years ago. In his poem called The Metamorphoses, written around 8 AD, Ovid tells the tale of a king named Lycaon. Lycaon ruled a region of ancient Greece called Arcadia. He was proud. He was cruel. And one day he decided to test whether the god Zeus was truly all-knowing. So he served Zeus a meal made from human flesh. Zeus was not fooled. He was furious. He flipped the table, and with a bolt of divine wrath, he transformed Lycaon into a wolf. Not killed, not banished, transformed. Forced to keep his mind, his memories, his guilt, his awareness, trapped inside the body of the animal that best represented what he had become. This is the oldest recorded werewolf story in Western civilization. And notice what it actually says. It does not say that wolves are evil. It says that humans can become monstrous. The wolf is not the villain. The human is. That idea that a person could lose their humanity and become something predatory, something that hunts its own kind. That idea burrowed into the European mind and never left. But why the wolf? Why not the bear? Why not the lion? Why not any other predator? The answer is simpler than you think. Wolves lived beside humans for thousands of years. They were the animal we saw most often, the animal that took our livestock, the animal that howled outside our walls at night. In pre-Christian Europe, the wolf was not a symbol of evil. It was a symbol of raw, untamed power. The Germanic and Norse peoples did not fear wolves. They admired them. Warriors called berserkers, a word that comes from the Old Norse for bare shirt, sometimes wore wolf skins into battle and fought in a trance-like fury. They were called ulfhidnar or wolf coats. They were elite. They were terrifying. They were considered sacred. So when Christianity spread across Europe, the wolf had to be rebranded. The old gods became demons. The old sacred animals became monsters. And the wolf, the animal that symbolized wild, ungovernable human power, became the devil's disguise. The church did not invent the werewolf, but the church made the werewolf dangerous, because now transforming into a wolf was not a gift from the gods, it was a pact with Satan. And that is exactly what Peter Stump confessed to. He said a demon gave him the power. He said he used it to kill. He said he could not stop. But here is where the real story begins. Because modern science has found explanations for what people like Peter Stump might have actually experienced. And the explanations are, in some ways, more terrifying than any myth. In 2004, a team of researchers led by psychiatrist Nadia Ilhan and colleagues published a study in the journal Biological Psychiatry documenting cases of what they called clinical lycanthropy. Clinical lycanthropy is a rare psychiatric condition in which a person genuinely believes they are transforming into an animal, usually a wolf. Patients describe feeling their bones shift. They describe the urge to crawl on all fours. They describe hearing howls inside their own skull. Brain scans of patients with clinical lycanthropy show abnormal activity in regions that control body image and self-perception. Their brains are, in a very real sense, rewriting the map of their own body. But clinical lycanthropy alone does not explain the historical werewolf panic, because it was not one person in a forest who started the fear. It was entire communities, whole villages, across centuries. To understand that, you have to look at what those villages were eating. In medieval and early modern Europe, rye bread was a staple food. And rye is vulnerable to a fungus called Claviceps purpurea, commonly known as ergot. When ergot infects a rye crop, it produces alkaloids, naturally occurring chemicals, that when eaten cause hallucinations, muscle spasms, the sensation of burning skin, convulsions, and psychosis. The condition is called ergotism, and in the Middle Ages it was so common that it had a nickname. They called it St. Anthony's fire. Now imagine an entire village eating contaminated bread. Imagine dozens of people simultaneously experiencing vivid hallucinations, seeing their neighbors transform into beasts, feeling their own bodies twist and change, convulsing on the floor in front of their families. Imagine a farmer named Peter Stump in the middle of all that, genuinely believing a demon had given him the body of a wolf, genuinely believing he had killed and eaten people, because his brain was on fire with fungal poison. The historian Ehrenberg Bachtiger documented multiple cases of mass ergotism outbreaks across Europe that coincided with werewolf accusations. When the bread was poisoned, the werewolves appeared. When the harvest was clean, they vanished. But ergotism is only one piece of the puzzle. There is another condition that the people of the 16th and 17th centuries had no way to diagnose. A condition so rare that even today fewer than 100 cases have ever been documented worldwide. It is called hypertrichosis, sometimes called werewolf syndrome. Hypertrichosis causes excessive hair growth across the face and body. In its most severe form, a person's entire face, including the forehead, cheeks, nose, and ears, is covered in thick, dark hair. The condition is genetic. It is not a disease. It is not contagious. It is simply a variation in how certain genes control hair follicle development. But in a time before genetics, before medicine, before anyone understood DNA, what would you think if you saw a person whose face was covered in fur? What would your village think? What would the church think? In the 16th century, a man known as Petrus Gonsalvus was brought to the court of King Henry II of France. He had hypertrichosis. He was displayed as a curiosity. He was studied. He was given in marriage to a beautiful woman, partly as an experiment, partly as entertainment. Their children inherited his condition. The story of Petrus Gonsalvus later inspired the fairy tale of Beauty and the Beast. Petrus was lucky. He was in a royal court. He survived. But across rural Europe, people with hypertrichosis were not so fortunate. They were identified as werewolves. They were tried. They were executed. Now there is one more piece of this puzzle, and it involves a very specific historical event that turned werewolf fear into a continent-wide terror. Between 1764 and 1767, something hunted the province of Gévaudan in southern France. Over the course of 3 years, it killed more than 100 people. The victims were mostly women and children who were alone in fields or on rural paths. Their wounds were described as savage, throats torn open, heads partially separated from bodies, limbs broken. The French king Louis XV sent professional wolf hunters. He sent soldiers. He sent his own best man, a hunter named François Antoine, who eventually killed a very large wolf in September of 1765. The attacks stopped for a few weeks. Then they resumed. The creature was never definitively identified. Some historians, including Jean-Marc Morisot, a French historian specializing in the history of wolves in France, have argued that the beast of Gévaudan was likely a pack of unusually large wolves, possibly a wolf-dog hybrid, driven to attack humans by habitat loss, prey scarcity, and the fact that Gévaudan's human population had expanded into previously wild territory. But the people of France did not think in terms of ecology. They thought in terms of monsters. The beast of Gévaudan became a werewolf in the popular imagination. Pamphlets were printed. Songs were written. The story spread across Europe and hardened the belief that real, physical werewolves could exist, that somewhere in the dark forests, a creature that was neither fully human nor fully animal was waiting. And that belief, that ancient, primal, irrational belief, never fully went away. Between the 15th and 18th centuries, an estimated 30,000 people were tried for werewolfism across Europe. 30,000. That number is not a myth. It comes from trial records, court documents, and church archives that historians have been cataloging for decades. Many of those 30,000 were executed. Some were tortured into confessing things they never did. Some were simply lonely, eccentric, or mentally ill people who lived on the edges of their communities. and were easy to blame when livestock died or children disappeared. The werewolf trial was the cousin of the witch trial. It followed the same logic. If bad things are happening, someone must be responsible. If someone must be responsible, it must be the person who is different. And if that person is different in a way that seems animal, if they are hairy, if they are reclusive, if they howl in distress, if they have seizures, if they eat strange things, if they are simply not like us, then they are not human. They are a wolf wearing human skin. And here is the part of the werewolf story that most people miss entirely. The werewolf legend is not really about wolves. It is about the fear of what lives inside you. Every werewolf myth, from ancient Greece to 16th century Germany to modern horror films, follows the same structure. A normal person, a hidden transformation, a loss of control, a monstrous act that the person cannot stop and cannot undo. The werewolf is not a monster that attacks you from outside. The werewolf is a monster that was always inside you. It is your rage, your hunger, your grief, your violence, the parts of yourself that you lock away because if you ever let them out, you would not recognize who you became. The ancient Greeks understood this. That is why Ovid made Lycaon a king, a person with power, a person who had every reason to be civilized. The transformation was not a punishment for being born monstrous. It was a revelation. It showed him what he already was. The medieval church understood this too. That is why werewolves made pacts with demons. The transformation was not physical, it was moral. You chose the wolf. You chose to give in. And modern neuroscience understands it in a different language entirely. In 2010, neuroscientist Jacques Panksepp published his foundational research on what he called the rage system, one of 7 primary emotional circuits hardwired into the mammalian brain. The rage circuit is ancient. It predates language. It predates culture. It predates humanity. It is the same circuit that makes a cornered wolf bare its teeth and a provoked human throw a punch. It does not care about morality. It does not care about consequences. It activates and your body responds. The werewolf is not a fairy tale. The werewolf is a metaphor for the rage system, for the predator circuit that every human being carries in their brain, inherited from millions of years of evolution, dormant until something wakes it up. You have not seen a werewolf, but you have felt the transformation. You have felt your patience snap. You have said words that did not sound like yours. You have acted in ways that an hour later you could not explain. You have looked back at a moment of fury or fear and thought, that was not me. But it was. That is the oldest truth in the werewolf legend. The monster was never in the forest. The monster was never in the wolf. The monster was always in the mirror. And the reason this myth has survived for 3,000 years, the reason every culture that has ever lived beside wolves has told some version of this story, is because every human being knows, in the quiet, honest part of themselves, that there is a version of them they are afraid of. Peter Stump did not have a magical belt. He had ergot in his bread and a demon in his theology, and a human brain that was capable of terrible things when stripped of its defenses. The beast of Gévaudan was not a werewolf. It was nature pushed to its edge, and a population too frightened to think clearly. And you are not a monster, but you carry the wolf inside you. Everyone does. The question was never whether the wolf exists. The question was always whether you would let it out.